What a beautiful day to be alive. Welcome to my sensory workshop. This is one of probably my most exciting topics that I get to talk about. I absolutely love children. I am probably still a child at heart, but sensory kids and some of their misunderstandings and misconceptions that comes with children that are experiencing sensory, because we don't always know what it is. We might think that they are behaving in an off-putting manner, that they're being, dramatic or exaggerating. And instead, we have to know that it's a very real thing. So I want to talk you guys through this and help you just weed through what you might be experiencing in your home and just reasons why, so you know what to do about it, how to respond to it, what sort of help there is for your child. So let me just I'm going to bump to my slides, and then I kind of forget. I think I have to double click to get my face back. Yes, there we go. And I want to go through this so you guys end here having a sense of peace on what's going on, that what they're experiencing is just information for you. It's data. How somebody's responding, the symptoms they might be having, is your body giving you feedback about what's going on internally. It's the only way it can communicate, and we have to listen to it. And then also, decide what we want to do about it necessarily. People have different values on how they want to approach health. And I am such a firm believer that our bodies are designed to be healthy, to self-heal, and to self-regulate. We've got to find the right environment to put them into that healing state. And we're going to talk about that today as well, and give you guys some actionable steps to be able to do. And, knowing that there is hope, that your kid, might go in these highs and lows and experience some very interesting behaviors and very dramatic behaviors from time to time, but knowing that there is a sense of calm that's there, because you do see that beautiful side of them when they are calm, when they are loving, when they do slow down and give you the love and hugs and the connection that you're looking for, and just to keep that state there more frequently, which I know is all of our desires. So as parents, we're doing the best we can with what we've been given, the tools we've been given. We're all amateurs raised by amateurs. So far, I don't know any professional parents. I always say, if you do, send them my way. I would love to chat with them. It'd be an interesting conversation. But here is what we often experience with a child that tends to be called common, or it tends to be called normal, and it's gotten to be really, really common behavior. And instead, when you can start to look at what's going on, it's not necessarily normal, but it is common, and that it is a sign that your child needs a little bit of help. And of course, we're going to have highs and lows in our life and how we feel, and depending on our mood and what's going on in and around us and the environment we're in and the stress we're experiencing. Yes, that's all going to play into our life, what I'm going to chat about. But we often talk about when we were in grade school, and I don't know how old you are, I'm 40, we didn't have children that had all sorts of diagnosable conditions, that were, experiencing allergies and needing EpiPens. I can remember a couple, some that were, there's one or two kids that were overweight, or maybe had some asthma or allergies, but we didn't have what we have today. In 2 out of 6, they say, have some form of diagnosable mental or emotional illness. And I even hate saying that word, illness, which is heartbreaking for me, because I am here on this planet, and I know I'm here to help every single child thrive, and to know that they can do and be anything, and that there should be nothing that holds them back. And I'm pretty passionate about that. So you can read on device this list that I have. I know you can think of all of the things that have increased since we've been children and what we're seeing. And there's a lot of pieces that play into it. Yes, but these are becoming all too common, and it shouldn't be the normal, and it's not a phase they're going to outgrow necessarily, because usually stress just moves to a different location inside of the body. Something that I talk to people all the time about is your nervous system. And you might not know that about your nervous system, and you might be like, okay, yep, I know what a nervous system is. I don't really necessarily know the intricate details of it, and you don't have to. But if you start to understand the foundational belief, or the foundations of your nervous system, controls every single cell inside of your body. You live your life through that nervous system. So everything you think, say, do, taste, smell, touch, Everything is processed through your nervous system, and your brain, we know, is in control. We know our brain does everything. We give the brain so much credit. We put billions of dollars in science into looking at the brain and how is it running, how's it operating, not looking beneath the cranium, knowing that it's got to get information from somewhere. And you're measuring the health of the nervous system. So the nervous system is carrying the information. The brain does the best it can with the information it's been given, makes the decisions and spits that information back out. And the quality of that nervous system and the mode of that nervous system, it matters, but it also tends to be our filter and our lens on life. And that's just why some of us can be listening to this information and feel really excited. Some of us can be a little nervous. Some people might be bored. I hope not. But you're hearing this information through our own filter and our lens, and life experience plays into this. Yes, but there's these modes that we're going to talk about that our nervous system gets into that can really start to play a huge piece of our health and our filter and our lens. And a lot of what our kids are experiencing is through a nervous system that's overwhelmed and stuck. I love Dr. Bruce Lipton. I talk probably about him every single webinar that I do. He's written a ton of books. He's highly awarded. And he had wrote this quote: "The function of the nervous system is to perceive the environment and coordinate the behavior of all other cells." I probably said that really fast. But when you start to look at some of the struggles our kids are having, it's through that perception of what's going on around us, coordinating that information, coordinating our bodies, and controlling that behavior. And if we're not looking at the nervous system, we're not looking at the whole picture. I know a lot of people like to break the body down into parts and just examine the behavior, just examine the emotions, just examine, the heart or the lungs or the throat or the stomach or the bowels, and, say there's a problem here without taking the bigger whole into consideration. As they all play together, our bodies are like communities, and we have communities of cells that work together in organ systems and body parts, and then we also have every cell that has those same systems inside of it. They all have a respiratory and a reproductive and excretory metabolism. All those cells have to get information from somewhere as well. They're coordinated by that nervous system. And, we used to think it was the DNA, right? The genes inside, the coding inside of the cell. And one of the things that Dr. Bruce Lipton did is he pulled the DNA out. He enucleated the cell. So it was just the cell without that DNA, and it still lived. And it still did its job. It just couldn't reproduce. So we know that DNA is causing the replication, but it's getting its information from somewhere else. We have to pay attention to that nervous system and the state that it's in. I often talk about living our life through our senses as well. So while we're awake during the day, we should be very alert. We should be able to move our body with ease throughout space. We should be able to communicate, learn new things. And we're really taking in the world through our senses. And we all know our typical 5 senses. The ones that we don't talk about are our enteric sense. So how do we feel inside? How are we feeling? How did somebody say made me feel? Did it make my chest tight? Did it make my stomach turn? We all know we have a physical reaction to stress. Someone's like, my butterflies in their stomach. Our internal body responds exactly how we're feeling, but there's often times when we have these heightened experiences and it doesn't make us feel good, we'll start to also disassociate that feeling. So we can talk about that a little bit later too. And balance and movement. So where are we at in time and space? That's proprioception, that's movement sense. And that's in our muscles and in our joints. And movement really is feeding the brain. When our kids were really little, we were paying attention to, are they reaching their motor milestones? What's going on? If they're reaching them, we're on track. The brain's on track because the brain is so largely mechanoreceptor driven. Well, if it's getting inappropriate information from that proprioceptive feedback, it's going to give the same information right back out. And I'm going to talk about that here in a little bit as well. The nervous system has these 2 modes of operation that it runs in, It has a fight or flight response, which is a wonderful, amazing response that we need to live and survive and protect ourselves. Then we have a growth, healing, resting, and digesting. It's called your sympathetic and your parasympathetic nervous system. And they cannot be on at the same time. So I put up this nerve chart just so you guys can take a look at the nervous system and in the control of those 2 systems. and where it comes from. So if you notice the parasympathetic nervous system, can you see the neurological control and looking at what it does to those organs and glands? And then our sympathetic nervous system, the neurological control and what it's doing, they're completely opposite of each other. They cannot be in growth and protection at the same time. That's another Bruce Lipton conversation as well. So our sympathetic nervous system, let me kind of explain what happens when your body is triggering that. Say somebody, jumps out and scares you. Say there's a bear, you're taking out your trash. You are instantly responding. Your heart rate goes up, your blood pressure goes up, the energy goes from your internal system out to your core, out to your muscles to run or flee. Things are tense, they're tight, you're on high alert, your hearing's up, your vision is up, you are tactile is up, you are just ready for a fight or a flight or a freeze. And now they have fawn, but that's kind of a long-term thing with that response. And there's about 1,200 chemicals that are dumped throughout the body to change the physiology of every single cell. Our prefrontal cortex, so the part that is logical, reasonable thinking, and we call it our executive function. It's the last part of the brain to form, disengages. So if this is the lid on our brain, which is our prefrontal cortex, it disengages, the hindbrain takes over, which is very impulsive and reactive, which is wonderful when you need to respond really quickly. If you are running from that bear and you're on flee mode, you also know there's going to be a bunch of changes that are going on inside the body. You aren't necessarily, when you're in fight or flight or running from a bear, and that's just how your body feels, you aren't interested in learning anything new. You aren't interested in slowing down and saying hello to someone. You aren't interested in digesting food. Excuse me. You're interested in very quick sugars to eat to sustain that fight or flight response. If you needed to, right? That's what you're going to eat. And this is long-term fight or flight as well. And you know what else is going to be turned down is your immune response, your digestive response, except for inflammation. Inflammation goes up. You have to be ready to heal and repair from injury you might have sustained. Once again, what a fantastic place to be if you need to survive. Fight or flight is the survival mechanism. Once again, you can't be in parasympathetic, can't be in growth and protection at the same time. Parasympathetic nervous system is there to heal and repair, calm, rejuvenate, slow things down. When you are completely engaged with that prefrontal cortex, with that lid, when the lid goes on, executive function is on, you can almost like zoom back, look at the whole picture. Now you have a balance that's going on between the two. And the problem is when we have that sympathetic fight or flight and we're triggered over and over and over again, we start living there. And when all those senses are up, that's typically what we're seeing in a child who's like, oh man, is this a sensory issue or is this a behavior? Well, if you remember, the nervous system controls every single cell inside of the body. It's responding appropriately to the perceived threat that's there, even if we don't think it's a threat. We don't think bedtime's a threat. We don't think socks and shoes are a threat. We don't think, loud noises, bright lights are a threat, teachers, lots of people. That might not be a threat to your nervous system, but it is to someone that's stuck in that fight or flight response. And often what happens, unfortunately, is they stay there. So what I want you to look at with this new picture that I just pulled up is that middle word, subluxation. That's what we are looking at as chiropractors, that stuck fight or flight stress that's inside of the body. And the environment is out on the outside. So if you're looking at a stuck nervous system that's in fight or flight, and then we start feeding it fight or flight. So not only when I mentioned, you don't want to slow down when you're in fight or flight, there's no way. And you're just going to want really quick, high sugar, high carb nutrients to feed that. It's typically what we're going to see. Sometimes we don't want to digest mushy food or touch that because it doesn't feel good inside of the body. These are all things that are going to, yes, keep perpetuating the fight or flight response, but often kind of difficult to get out of. So when I often talk to families like, man, I can't get my kid to eat anything else. This is all they want, and they don't even sit down for a meal, or they can't eat, they're too tired to finish a meal. These are when we're looking at a stuck system that is unable to process appropriately, because if you remember, chronic fight or flight turns on that digestive system as well. Chemicals that are in and around us, they're going to interfere and start causing fight or flight and stress in the body, heighten that inflammatory response that I talked about. And physical stress You guys, this has been a real issue for our kids, unfortunately. I know people think about physical stress. They're like, oh, I tripped and fell or went off the monkey bars, I need help, or I might need a chiropractor. That's what most people think of chiropractors for, is, pain and injury. And really, when you look at a physical stress, the biggest threat to our kids today is not moving their body enough. Sitting in front of a computer, sitting with a device in their hand, sitting in the classroom, and I get it, like your kids go to school, they don't, not everybody homeschools, and they can be up moving around, or at a school where that's an option. But that sustained non-motion is really what's more of a threat to our kids' body than too much movement. And often the kids have to keep up with the amount of movement that's going on inside that brain. When it's hardwired, they want to move their bodies all over the place. So they might be even fatiguing themselves. The emotional stress component of this is, especially when you're stuck in fight or flight, when you're in an emotional environment, yes, sometimes we live in high stress environments. Sometimes there's divorce situations and one parent might be different than the other parent. It's hard to, be able to maintain that. School might be really stressful for them. Once again, it can be a perceived stress as well. That emotional piece of it, your brain doesn't know whether or not you are in that stressful situation or you're thinking about it. It has the same response. That same fight or flight is triggered. And if you remember, prefrontal cortex engages, impulsive and reactive, 1,200 chemicals are being dumped, the senses are going back up, immune is going down, digestive is going down, inflammatory is going up. And this is what we're seeing: interference, irritation, and inflammation. I know those words are really light, but you probably can't quite see it, are now sustaining in that fight or flight response, and it's hard to get out. It becomes a stuck cyclical cycle. And like I said before in the beginning, it's wonderful when we experience our child. You're like, oh man, look at how calm and gentle and peaceful and wonderful and loving and tender this child is. And then you experience like this other like craziness that's going on, and it's hard to figure out, like, geez, are we coming or going? What's going to trip trip them off this time? We're kind of walking around on eggshells. Will they try this new thing or this new food? Or I get it, because I lived with one for a really long time, which is why I got into this, because I didn't understand how he was living his life. His nervous system was different than my nervous system. And we often say you get your mother's nervous system. Well, I was stressed at the time when I was pregnant with him, not really thinking about the fact that, I'm giving him my hormones and my energy. He's developing in utero, and from gestation or conception until 32 weeks gestation, just that fight or flight response, just the fight or flight side of the nervous system is what's in control. That baby needs to survive to 32 weeks. Then when you're looking at 32 to 40 weeks, that's when all that rapid organ development is happening. The baby's gaining a bunch of weight. That's the parasympathetic nervous system kicking in. So often if we see a baby that came into the world early, they are missing out on that calming response already, which is already going to kind of set the stage for them to be under stress. So we've started to notice a theme or a path that these kids get on. And usually it doesn't have to be all 7 of these things. Don't get me wrong. Usually the more of one stress compared to the other, it's going to all contribute. But you usually see there might be a fertility challenge, a pregnancy challenge. I know I had a miscarriage just before I had Landon, so I was really worried about that pregnancy. And then starting to add in, usually when we're stressed during pregnancy, we need some more interventions during the birth. I was gratefully, I was able to have him at home, but he came really fast. And I didn't really look at that as an injury and how much stress was put on his head and neck when he came flying out of the birth canal. But there's a lot of births, unfortunately or fortunately. Medical intervention is a wonderful thing when it saves our child's life, for sure. But we don't look at the repercussions of a child's here, he's alive or she's alive. Now what to do about the stress that happened during the birth. And they've found that 99 out of 100 infants that they have done research on have some form of neurological interference at the birth. And that was in 2015, not even done by chiropractors. There's going to be a varying degree there that's going to interfere with their life. And, I'm talking about episiotomies, Pitocin, breaking the water, epidurals, using vacuum forceps, cesarean section, they all play into it. We were born into fight or flight, or that's triggered. we typically have a stress colicky baby. They're not digesting their food well. They don't feel comfortable. They're crying all the time. They can't relax, nor can mom. There's usually breast milk becomes a problem. Nursing latching because everyone's stressed out, not eating well. Mom's overanalyzing her diet, and then that baby, the second they get they start to get a tooth, there's extra mucus, there was stress in this neck from the birth. Now the ears aren't draining. Now they're getting, ear infections and needing ear tubes and antibiotics. Now we're adding, if you remember that cycle, we're adding into more chemical and physical stress into their lives. And it's starting to just build inside of the body until, they might be that hyperactive toddler that was really difficult to potty train, or now they have to sit in school and they can't sit still, they can't learn. That fight or flight response has been taking over. That's how they've been neurologically wired. And it gets really stressful and difficult for the family, so they don't know what to do. And you might be getting, some people are getting letters from the school, or talking to the school counselor saying maybe your child needs some sort of therapy. And, when I was evaluating mine, his wasn't quite so rapid. He wasn't so dramatic. It just had developed really slowly. He didn't have, super stressful delivery. It was at home, unmedicated. Just happened really fast. He wasn't a colicky baby, but we really started noticing later on he was getting croup more often. He was more sick than his brother was. And then he wasn't connecting the dots in school, kind of socially withdrawn. And we have two little categories too of our kids that we often see. We've got one category of kids that are like the hyperactive go. It's that usually they're sensory seekers. They like that like hard hugs, and they're really aggressive and they can't really sit still and compose themselves. And then we have the ones that are a little bit slower. They're a little more disconnected. Things are harder to put together. Can't quite connect the dots. They're usually the kids that might have like some speech and maybe some vision issues. And we see those two different paths that they go on, and it really depends on where their stuck stress is. And we've found in our neurological scans that they run. They're very close together, but one's in here and one's down here. And it's wild, the difference in what it can do and play into their life and development. But if they continue on this path, you get exhausted from fight or flight. You should not be there all the time. You should be triggered with it all the time. And we get anxious, exhausted, depressed teens, and that's where we're at today. That's probably my biggest influx of kids right now are teens with anxiety, and my sensory kids as well, because it's a huge thing that's affecting our teens right now, and also our little ones who have been growing and developing in this very odd time we've been living in for the past 2 years. And I've had emotional highs and lows with it. So I'm being very kind when I'm saying odd time. It definitely has done some pretty rough things to our kids, and especially with a child who might have some neurological interference. We're feeding the emotional response, not feeling safe, and then most people they trust are covered up in a mask, and we can't see the face. We can't see what we said, how it made somebody feel, including somebody of authority or a friend, and it's been really playing into their emotional health as well. I have this picture. The last one was a video of a C-section. I'm not going to show it to you, but I've watched it thousands of times. I promise you. They're not gentle, and I've watched lots of them throughout my training to see exactly what happens with the head or neck when there's a cesarean section. Because some people are like, birth's not that traumatic, and then you take a look at, what can happen in the birth process. And once again, my little guy was not a cesarean section, but he was very fast, and that can also interfere with that nervous system that's right up here in that upper cervical. Here, if you guys like white papers, I do have that up about that study that was done in 2015 looking at neurological interference in our babies and our kids. And we've known since the 80s. They did a study in Germany from natural vaginal births. Dr. Gutmann did, and saw that 80% of them had neurological interference. He called it KISS syndrome, kinematic imbalance and suboccipital strain, which is just really a neck imbalance is all that means. It's just a fancy term for that. So it's been a thing that we've noticed for sure. And what happens when there's an injury at birth, that just like you would, injure any other joint, say your shoulder, is tight, not moving well, because it was yanked out of place, pulled. We never pull on, obviously we know we never pull on an infant's head or neck after birth, right? Nobody would ever pick up a baby from its chair by its head and neck and kind of dangle it around. But that's often what happens during the birth process. We are always protecting the head or neck. if you aren't looking to see if there was some stress that happened during the birth, now we're working with a baby trying to figure out and guess what's happening to it, and all the data they're giving you is crying. So it'll lock up and freeze up. The muscles are tight. There's inflammation in there. There's irritation in there. They're probably not moving it well. Some of them that get plagocephaly, or that locked up part of their skull starts to flatten because they don't want to move their head or neck. We call that dyskinesia. It's abnormal movement. It's fixated and it's not moving well. It's misaligned, just like, your shoulder might be. You don't want to use it. It doesn't feel good. It's not comfortable. It takes a lot of healing, and typically it takes somebody putting it back into place to be able to fully use that function again. And some people don't even know that, and they have shoulder surgery. But once they get up against gravity, which is when it's very, very important, you'll see the head and neck kind of locked into this position. And I'd even encourage you to look at your kids when they're upright, look where their shoulders are at, and their head and their neck. Is their head and neck rotated? It's all these things that we pay really close attention to in our office when we're evaluating a child, of how does their body move with ease through space. And this upper cervical spine that we're looking at, so this is the back of the head, here's a neck, we're looking at the brainstem. This first cervical vertebra is the one that I was talking about that we're usually seeing with kids that have that hyperactive attentive focus is up here. And then the second cervical vertebra is usually where we see children that have that disconnection piece of it, which is really interfering a lot with the way their brain is getting feedback from the body and from the nervous system to that brain. So when you start to look at how your brain gets feedback, how it gets proprioception, most of it comes from the spine. A lot of it comes from that upper cervical spine, because you can never see your spine. Your eyes rely on something called the eyes of your spine. In your neck, they're in the little muscle spindles. Every time it bends and moves appropriately, it's sending feedback to your brain to say, here's where I'm at. Your brain needs a constant, up-to-date 3D image of where your body parts are. It's so important that for motor development, but also that sense of how you move your body through time and space to keep developing the motor system. But then as you age, the coordination factor, joint wear and tear is a huge thing. Being a balance and a fall risk, we can all imagine, somebody that's elderly and they're kind of hunched over, things aren't moving well. Nothing's moving well. Movement is life. Their digestive system isn't working where they're a balance and a fall risk because everything's here. Their brain's not getting feedback of where they're at. You need movement. I know the yogis say you're only as young as your spine is flexible, and I believe them. You need movement in there. That fixation component is huge in interfering with that feedback to the brain. Your upper cervical spine also houses the brainstem. That was that red organ we were looking at. That does filtering. That filters and all of the information. It's like air traffic control, sending the signals to land in the brain. It also has about 50% of our blood-brain barrier. So when you hear about kids that have had toxicity in their brains, typically it's been altered to allow that toxicity to reach their brain as well. And there's toxins everywhere. Anything we inject, ingest, and inhale goes into our body and has to be filtered through our organs, through our blood. And the more stress we experience, the harder the body has to work to get through it. And it can be a really, like I said, cyclical cycle. I have this picture here. We call it the fuse box, but it looks at the nervous system. You can't read it because it's too small even for me to read. But it's something I show every patient, is your brain communicating with all your body parts. And when there is a symptom, some data, we're going to see the effects of that stress here. And it's really long-term stress. It's sustained stress over time is when we start to see a consequence of it, because we're going to see stress in our lives. We know stress will be there. We need to be adaptable to that stress. And the better our nervous system can process it, the more healing capacity that it has, then it can handle the stress that comes our way. And yes, sometimes it's a lot, and your nervous system's probably going to need some more support then, and no more stress added to it, which is like eating food, eating really well and moving your body well and thinking well. That all plays into it. And when you have a calm nervous system, all of that is done so much easier. And even the people that I talk to that, like, my kid's done all sorts of therapy, and we kind of hit a plateau. Well, great. Those therapies are so wonderful. They're more wonderful through a calm nervous system, through a nervous system that can receive that information. Then it really takes an effect of how it was designed to work. And it's designed to work through a calm nervous system. and it just can't quite be received yet. Here's a picture of one of our scans, what it'll look at altered input to the brain, and you can see this child had some pretty severe neurological compromise to his brain. And he has got a really wonderful story of, being one of those kids that are stuck in fight or flight, night terrors, not sleeping through the night, unable to eat food, terrible allergies, not accepted in the private school his siblings were, to doing wonderful. So, but he had a cord wrapped birth, and that's, a huge stressor on that neck. Excuse me. When you're starting to look at that stuck stress, we call it altered perception, just like I talked about with your nervous system, but it does alter the function. And typically, here's the order in which it goes through. Usually it's going to affect that motor system. Remember, everything's on high alert on fight or flight. The gut's going to turn down. That's usually number 2 to really start to interfere with our lives. Immune system, we're struggling a little bit more. Speech, that's the fine motor, that's a fine tune, that's being able to slow your brain down or even connect the brain, the dots enough to see what people are saying, how they're moving their mouth. That facial recognition is huge with that, especially with social, emotional, and behavioral. They will all play into this. And once a child, doesn't feel good, is always on high alert, they're not digesting their food well, they aren't able to communicate well, they don't feel well socially, you're going to see it in their behavior. And you're going to see it emotionally. They're going to start to get discouraged. They're going to start to understand, this is different. I feel different. Not everybody's like this, or they just don't feel comfortable. And like I said before, they're going to want to start to disassociate with the way their body feels in a situation as well. And that's when you start to lack that intuitive sense. So we're all about calming this. We're all about finding that stuck stress and removing it and calming the brain. And the coolest thing that we found is that our adjustments change the brain. They actually put that lid on the prefrontal cortex, sync the right and left sides of the brain, and allow your body to be at more peace and more harmony. It can now, I always talk about it like backing up from the picture. It can see the whole thing. So when we're in stress, that lid's off. We're just paying attention to survival until the body gets to a fatigue point. There's something called our vagus nerve that also changes with adjustments, and it really lives in that prefrontal cortex. Remember, that's an executive function up there. Your vagus nerve was that nerve I was showing you that's in control, that one where I said, look at the parasympathetic nervous system and the neurological control. Look at the sympathetic nervous system and the neurological control. A lot of it comes from the brain. And the vagus nerve is one of only 2 cranial nerves. You've got 12. 2 leave the head, leave the cranial vault, leaves right here in that upper cervical, where I'm showing you where most of the kids have neurological interference, and that's going to change the tone of the vagus nerve. Wanders throughout, down the neck, throughout all the organs and glands, sending feedback to the brain. It's got 9 times more fibers than any other nerve in the body, giving information back to the brain. Well, if the fight or flight's taking over, vagus nerve doesn't have a real good tone, a real good feedback, and it can't control and pull back from that fight or flight response. We see a consequence of that as well. And those adjustments start bringing up that vagus nerve. We also run a scan that looks at stress in the vagus nerve and does a heart rate variability, if you guys know what that is, which is super cool to look at the health of the internal system. They even ran and did research on heart rate variability and COVID, and people with low heart rate variability just didn't fare as well. People with higher ones were able to, get over it and heal and repair from that stress. Another scan that we look at is it's a thermography scan looking for really deep stress that's interfering with organs and glands. We look at something called dysautonomia. So that's that autonomic nervous system. Some of that gut and immune response, it's not running the way that we want it to. And we can run that in our thermal scan as well. And that gives us a good idea, especially doc-wise, to look at how deep is the stress running, how much it's affecting organs and glands and interference to the brain. And then getting a really appropriate amount of care that your child needs and a good guideline for your child and your family to know, here's what it's going to take. I like to look at this little chart from Harvard, which I think is really powerful, to look at age across the bottom there, 2 years old to 70 years old. And then when you're looking at the brain's ability to change is that blue line and the amount of effort required to do so. So I think wonderful things in here. Number one, your brain can always change. Yes, it takes a little bit more energy, but there's such a huge ability. As you can see, birth to 3 is where we do the rapid neurological development in our adolescence to get the brain to change and its response to its experiences, to the perception that's coming through that nervous system to help calm it down, and knowing that it can change, which is really wonderful. And once it does, you see a brain that's calm, you see the lid on, they feel it more in control, they can connect not only internally but externally with other people. And coordination is huge, coordination of moving their body, but coordination of all orchestrating everything that's going on, from learning information to connecting with friends and coordinating what do I want to do next in life. Let's pre-plan something out. And I'm not talking about like, I might be a CPA. I should go talk to Johnny because I hadn't seen him in a while. It's a very powerful what the brain can do in a calm state and an organized state. So I always want to give you the common side effects. Kids can also be really tired when they're trying to heal. I think that people give doctors too much credit for their child or themselves on healing. And some doctors like saved your life. They did a surgery, is so fantastic. But your body had to heal. Your body did the healing. Chiropractic is designed to calm the brain, allow the brain and body to communicate the way that it's designed to be self-healing, self-regulating, and healthy. And that's what it does. It creates a path to do that, a calm nervous system, organized brain that can say, back up from the picture. Here's what's going on. Here's where I need to prioritize the information, not into stress and survival, and not feeding that fight or flight response. If you guys don't, I'm assuming you follow me on social media because you're on here or you're a patient and you heard about the webinars that I do and the information that I give out. But always asking questions is wonderful. I think when you know why, you're able to set things into motion. Those 3 T's are that physical, chemical, and emotional stress that I talked about that feeds that fight or flight response. And that's much easier done through a calm nervous system. But set some new goals for your kids, gain some new hope. I mean, it's so important to know that your child can heal, and it's important to measure the gain. You might have this like, here's where I want my child, and this is my ideal, image and self and behavior of my child, but they're here. Well, here might be better than where they were here, and looking back to say, oh, this is how far we've come is an important thing, and we like to celebrate that with our kids, to know that once again they can do and be anything, but progress is really, really key. So here's my guy. This is my home birth. I was talking about my little Landon, who he's just such a miracle. He's 12 years old now, and we experienced this stress from about age 3 to 5 when we really started figuring it out, and sent me on this mission to figure out how to help him, what was going on inside of his body. I did all my, advanced training and bought these neuro scans and started helping children when I saw Landon's life turn around, to know that there's so many other families that are out there stuck. They're stressed. Their marriages are stressed. They're not sleeping through the night because their kid's not. There's just like everyone's on edge, and you're in fight or flight all the time and worried and up Googling and figuring out what to do. And Landon has said before, and he's looked down our office walls because it's full of pictures of kids and families that have a higher quality of life because of the choices that they've been able to make and their changes in chiropractic care. And Landon's like, I now know why I had to struggle, so all these kids didn't have to. And I was like, that's the coolest story. Man, what an amazing purpose. And you would never know this kid had the struggles that he did. I'm just so proud of him. And once again, I think every kid deserves a chance, deserves to know what's going on. Is their nervous system stuck? Is that what's causing these problems? How do we calm it down? Come in for your first visit. There's a scan that we're going to do. Sit down with the doctor. We've got lengthy intake, but it really helps us paint a picture of what's going on so we can get you the help that you need. It's normally $189 if you're coming off the streets. When you've come to one of my webinars and you're pre-educated and you kind of understand things, it's $100. And that's, I feel like, highly, highly valuable to know here's what's going on, and then decide from there on the game plan moving forward, and realizing that there's a better way to navigate your child's stress, and you and your family deserve it.